Please don't take it off.
Please don't take it off. The giant virgin mail order bride begs, but when the rancher removes the cloth, he froze. The giant mail order bride stood trembling before her new rancher husband, her massive frame dwarfed only by her terror as his calloused hands reached for the cloth wrapped around her shoulders. Please don't take it off, Magnolia Thornwell begged, her voice breaking, towering over Jasper Cordell by nearly 8 inches, even as she shrank into herself with shame. The virgin bride had traveled 3 days across the Montana Territory to marry this weathered rancher she'd never met, carrying a secret beneath that cloth, a secret that had destroyed every chance at love she'd ever had. But when the rancher slowly unwrapped the fabric despite her desperate pleas, revealing what she'd hidden for 7 years, he didn't just freeze. His entire body went rigid, his face drained of all color, and tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks. What could make a hardened Montana rancher weep at the sight of his giant mail-order bride's hidden truth? And why did this virgin woman believe that one piece of cloth was all that stood between her and complete rejection on her wedding night? 3 hours earlier, Magnolia had stepped off that dusty stagecoach in Copperhead Creek, and the entire town had gone silent. At 6 feet 2 inches, she wasn't just tall, she was a spectacle. Women clutched their children closer, men stared with mouths hanging open, then quickly looked away as if her size was something indecent, something shameful to witness. The stagecoach driver had actually laughed when he'd helped her down, a cruel chuckle that said everything about what the world thought of women like her. She'd heard it all before: freak, giant, unnatural, monster. 24 years of those words had taught Magnolia to make herself small in every way, except the one that mattered. Her body simply refused to shrink, no matter how much her spirit tried to. Then she saw him. Jasper Cordell stood beside the general store, hat in his hands, and Magnolia's heart had sunk straight through the floorboards of that wagon. He was tiny. Well, not tiny. 5'7" wasn't tiny for most men. But standing next to her, he looked like a boy. His face was weathered and kind, with crow's feet around gentle brown eyes that had seen too much sun and too much sorrow. His hands were small but strong, the kind of hands that knew honest work. And when he looked up at her, really looked, not with mockery or fear, but with something that almost resembled wonder. Magnolia had wanted to cry. This man had paid her travel fare, had sent letters for 6 months, had married her sight unseen based on one photograph that didn't show her full height. And now he was seeing what he'd bought, and the disappointment would come any second. It always did. Miss Thornwell? His voice was rough like gravel and honey mixed together. You're even more beautiful than I imagined. Magnolia had literally gasped. No one called her beautiful. No one. Mr. Cordell, in my letters, I tried to explain about my height. Jasper. Please, call me Jasper. He smiled, and it transformed his whole weathered face into something young and hopeful. And I know exactly how tall you are, Magnolia. You told me in your 3rd letter, 6'2" in your bare feet, 6'4" in boots. I read that letter so many times I memorized it. He stepped closer, craning his neck to look up at her. I'm 5'7" on a good day when I wear thick socks. Does that bother you? Did it bother her? This man was asking if his size bothered her, when she'd spent her entire life being rejected for hers. Magnolia had felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been sealed shut since the fire 7 years ago. No, she whispered, no, it doesn't bother me at all. The Reverend married them 30 minutes later in a ceremony that felt both rushed and eternal. Magnolia had to bend down significantly to stand beside Jasper at the altar. She heard the townspeople whispering, saw them nudging each other and pointing. Look at them, the giant and the shrimp. What a pair! She's gonna crush him on their wedding night. Poor bastard doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. Each whisper was a knife, but Magnolia kept her face still. She'd learned long ago not to let them see her bleed. But then Jasper had taken her hand, his small, rough palm barely covering half of hers, and he'd squeezed it, not gently, not apologetically, but firmly, purposefully, like he was saying without words, "I chose you. I see them staring and I don't care. You're mine now and I'm yours, and that's all that matters." When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Jasper had stood on his tiptoes to kiss her, and Magnolia had bent down to meet him halfway. That kiss, chaste and brief as it was, had tasted like hope, like maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't end the way everything else in her life had ended. In rejection, in shame, in fire. The wagon ride to his ranch took 2 hours, and Magnolia spent most of it sitting in the back because Jasper had quietly explained that both their weights combined might be too much for old Bessie, his mare. He'd said it kindly, practically, but Magnolia had still felt the familiar burn of humiliation. Too big, too heavy, too much. She watched the Montana landscape roll past, endless golden plains meeting purple mountains, sky so big it seemed to swallow everything. It was beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Jasper had said the nearest neighbor was 3 days' ride away. 3 days. They would be completely alone. No one to hear her scream if this man turned out to be like the others. No one to help if he decided that a woman her size needed to be broken, tamed, put in her place. But Jasper just drove the wagon and hummed an old hymn, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That's Copper Ridge there. Sometimes you can see elk at dawn. And over there, that creek runs year-round. Good fishing if you like trout." He talked to her like she was a person, not a curiosity. Like they were partners setting out on an adventure together, not a buyer who'd purchased faulty goods and was trying to make the best of it. When they finally reached his ranch, Magnolia's breath caught. It wasn't grand, just a sturdy log cabin, a barn, some corrals holding maybe 30 head of cattle. But it was maintained with obvious care and pride. Flower boxes sat beneath the windows, filled with hardy wildflowers that somehow thrived in this harsh country. The porch was swept clean, smoke curled from the chimney, welcoming them home. "It ain't much," Jasper had said, helping her down from the wagon. His hands barely reached her waist. "But it's honest work and it's paid for. I thought maybe you'd like to make it yours too. Our home, together." Our home, together. 2 words that Magnolia had never thought she'd hear directed at her. She'd looked down at this small, weathered rancher who was offering her not just shelter but belonging, and something in her chest had started to ache with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It felt dangerous, like standing too close to a fire, like wanting something so badly that losing it would destroy you. She'd been destroyed once already. She wasn't sure she could survive it again, but God help her, she wanted to try. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the possibility of a life where being big and scarred and broken didn't mean being alone forever. Jasper showed her through the cabin, and Magnolia noticed everything. 2 rooms total, the main living area with kitchen and fireplace, and a bedroom with 1 bed. 1 small bed that they would be expected to share tonight. Her stomach twisted with fear and something else, something she'd never let herself feel before. She was 24 years old, and she'd never been touched by a man with anything except disgust or clinical assessment. The doctors after the fire examining her burns, the men who'd courted her briefly before seeing her scars and fleeing. No one had ever touched her with desire, with tenderness, and tonight this man, this stranger who was now her husband, would have every legal and moral right to claim what he'd paid for, to consummate their marriage, to take her virginity whether she was ready or not. "I can sleep in the barn," Jasper said suddenly, and Magnolia realized she'd been staring at the bed with visible panic on her face. If you need time to adjust, Magnolia, I know this ain't a conventional marriage. You don't know me. I don't really know you beyond letters. I won't force nothing on you that you're not ready for." Magnolia had turned to look at this man, really look at him, and felt that dangerous ache in her chest grow stronger. Every other man who'd shown interest in her had made demands, had expectations, had wanted to conquer the giant woman, to prove something to themselves, to other men, to the world. But Jasper just stood there looking tired and kind and achingly lonely, offering to sleep with the horses rather than make her uncomfortable. Something about that kindness cracked through the walls Magnolia had spent 7 years building around her heart. "You're my husband," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The barn is for animals, not men." His smile could have lit up the entire Montana territory. They ate dinner together as the sun set, venison stew that Jasper had made himself, warm bread from town, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Magnolia watched him move around the small kitchen with practiced ease, and she'd gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Your first wife, Abigail, she taught you to cook?" Jasper's face had clouded over immediately, and Magnolia wished she could take the words back, but he sat down across from her, his small hands wrapped around his coffee cup, and he'd answered honestly. "Abigail died 4 years back. Cholera outbreaks swept through 3 counties. She was a good woman, small, delicate, everything a proper wife should be." The implication hung in the air between them like smoke. Everything you're not." But then Jasper continued, and his words surprised her again. "She was also mean-tempered when crossed, stubborn as a Missouri mule, and couldn't shoot worth a damn. Burned everything she tried to cook, and once punched a traveling preacher who suggested women shouldn't speak in church." He smiled sadly, stirring his coffee. "I loved her fierce, Magnolia. Loved her with everything I had. But I ain't looking for another Abigail. I'm looking for a partner, someone strong enough to handle this life out here. Strong enough like you." He'd stood then, extending his hand across the table. His palm was calloused and scarred and small, but when Magnolia placed her much larger hand in his, it felt like something clicking into place, like 2 pieces of a puzzle that shouldn't fit but somehow did. "Jasper, there's something you should know about me," Magnolia heard herself saying. "Something I didn't mention in my letters because I was afraid you'd—" She couldn't finish. "Afraid you'd reject me like everyone else. Afraid you'd send me back. Afraid you'd look at me with the same disgust I see every time I catch my reflection and see what the fire made me." Jasper squeezed her hand gently. "We all got secrets, Magnolia. Things we're ashamed of. Things we wish we could change, but can't." His brown eyes were steady on hers, and there was something in them, some shadow of old pain, that made Magnolia wonder what secrets this small, kind rancher carried. "Your secret," he said quietly, "is it something that'll hurt me or the ranch?" She shook her head. "Then the rest we can figure out together." Night fell over Montana like a heavy quilt being pulled across the sky, and Magnolia found herself standing in the small bedroom, hands shaking as she unbuttoned her traveling dress. Jasper had given her privacy to change, waiting outside by the fireplace like a gentleman. She could hear him out there, moving around, the creak of floorboards under his boots. In a few minutes he would come through that door. He would see her in her nightgown. He would expect, he had every right to expect, to consummate their marriage, to make her his wife in body as well as name. And when he did, he would discover what she'd been hiding, the thing that had destroyed every other chance at love she'd ever had. The physical proof of her failure, her curse, her unworthiness to be loved. Magnolia stood in front of the small mirror, wearing only her simple cotton nightgown now, but over it, wrapped around her shoulders and back like always, was the thick shawl, the cloth, her constant companion for 7 years. She never took it off in front of anyone. Never, even in the height of summer, even when the heat was unbearable, she kept it on. Because what was underneath was worse than any discomfort. What was underneath proved that she was marked, cursed, touched by the devil himself, as the church ladies back home had whispered. No man could love a woman who carried hell's fingerprints on her skin. She'd learned that lesson 3 times over. 3 men who'd courted her, who'd seemed interested, who'd made her hope, and all 3 had fled the moment they saw what was beneath the cloth. Her hands gripped the shawl tighter, knuckles white. Maybe she could keep it on. Maybe in the darkness Jasper wouldn't insist she remove it. Maybe she could bear his touch just this once, give him what he'd paid for, and then what? Live the rest of her life hiding from her own husband, flinching away from his hands, never letting him truly see her? That wasn't a marriage. That was a prison, and Magnolia was so tired of being imprisoned by shame, so tired of the weight of this secret crushing her chest every single day, so tired of being afraid. "Jasper," her voice came out as barely a whisper. You can come in now." The door opened and Jasper entered, already changed into his union suit, looking somehow even smaller in the lamplight. Vulnerable. His eyes found hers immediately, and Magnolia saw concern there. Gentleness, but also desire, a spark of it that made her stomach flip in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. "Maggie," he said softly, using the nickname for the first time. "I meant what I said earlier. We don't have to do nothing you're not ready for. We can just sleep. Just lie beside each other. Take our time getting to know." "I want to," Magnolia interrupted, and she was surprised to realize it was true. Despite the fear, despite the shame, despite everything, she wanted this, wanted him, wanted to know what it felt like to be touched with tenderness instead of disgust, wanted to be wanted. "I want to be your wife, Jasper, truly. But you need to see first. You need to know what you married before we go any further." She turned her back to him, unable to meet his eyes for what came next. Her hands clutched the shawl so tightly, her fingers ached. "When I was 17, she began, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow, like she was telling someone else's story. "Our family barn caught fire in the middle of the night. My parents, my 2 younger brothers, Thomas and William, they were all inside sleeping in the loft. We'd had guests and the house was full, so the boys thought it would be an adventure to sleep in the hay." Her throat closed up, but she forced herself to continue. Jasper deserved to know, deserved to understand what he was getting. "I woke up to screaming. I could see the flames from my bedroom window, orange and red, turning night into day. I ran. Didn't even put on shoes, just ran." The memories crashed over her like they always did, vivid and terrible. The heat of the flames, the sound of timber cracking, her brother's screams. "I made it inside before anyone could stop me. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. I found them huddled in the corner. Mama, Papa, Thomas, William. Papa was trying to break through the wall with his bare hands, trying to make a hole big enough for the boys to fit through. I grabbed Thomas, he was only 8, and I started pulling him toward the door. But then..." Her voice broke completely. "But then the roof collapsed. A burning beam, massive and heavy, fell right across my back, pinned me to the ground. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The weight of it, the fire eating through my dress, burning my skin. I screamed and screamed. Tears streamed down Magnolia's face, dripping onto the wooden floor. My father, God rest his soul, he found strength I'll never understand. He lifted that beam off me, lifted it with his bare hands, even though it was on fire, even though it was burning him too. He threw me toward the door, literally threw me like I weighed nothing. I landed outside in the dirt. The last thing I heard was him shouting, 'Run, Magnolia, run!' And then the whole barn came down. The entire structure just collapsed in on itself. I tried to go back in, tried so hard, but the flames were too high, too hot. I could hear them inside, hear them burning, hear them dying, and I just stood there like a coward and listened. The silence in the room was absolute. Magnolia couldn't hear Jasper breathing, couldn't hear anything except the pounding of her own heart and the echo of screams that would haunt her until the day she died. "I'm the only one who survived," she whispered. "Me, the one who should have been able to save them because I was big and strong. But I failed. I failed them all. And I'm marked for it. Forever marked by my cowardice, my weakness, my failure as a daughter and a sister." Her hands loosened slightly on the shawl. "The burns, they cover my whole back and left shoulder. The doctor said I was lucky to survive." "Lucky?" She laughed bitterly. "Every man who's courted me since, when they found out about the scars, they left. Said I was cursed. Said no man could love a woman who carried the devil's touch. Said I was unmarriageable." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "So if you want to send me back to town tomorrow, I'll understand. I'll leave quietly. I won't make a fuss or ask for anything. But I can't let you touch me without knowing what's underneath this cloth, without seeing what you really married." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. This was it. The moment when Jasper would realize his mistake, would see her for what she truly was, damaged, cursed, broken beyond repair. Magnolia braced herself for the rejection she knew was coming, had always been coming. "Can I see?" Jasper's voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. Magnolia's entire body went rigid. This was it, the end of the brief, beautiful dream. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking on the word. "Please don't take it off. Just leave it. We can do this in the dark. You won't have to see. You won't have to look at what I've become. Just please, please don't make me." "Maggie." Jasper's hand touched her elbow, so gentle it was like a butterfly landing. "May I?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except give the smallest nod. And then Jasper's hands, small and calloused, and infinitely careful, reached up and slowly began to unwrap the shawl from her shoulders. He had to stretch to reach, had to stand on his toes, but he moved with such deliberate gentleness that Magnolia felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. The cloth fell away like shame itself, pooling on the floor at her feet. The thin cotton of her nightgown did nothing to hide the scars, nothing to soften the reality of what she was. Magnolia squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the gasp of horror, the sharp intake of breath, the step backward, the stammered excuse, the cold rejection she'd heard 3 times before. Instead, she heard something that made her blood freeze in her veins, a choked sob. Her eyes flew open and she spun around. Jasper stood there, his face pale as death, his entire body rigid and trembling. Tears poured down his weathered cheeks. His small hands shook at his sides. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. This was worse than rejection. This was horror. This was disgust so profound he couldn't even form words. Magnolia felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "I'm sorry," she whispered desperately, reaching for the shawl to cover herself again. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you before you married me. I should have—" "You think you're the only one who's marked?" Jasper's voice came out strangled, raw with emotion. Magnolia froze. "What? You think you're the only one carrying scars?" His hands went to the buttons of his union suit, and before Magnolia could process what was happening, he pulled the garment over his head and let it drop to the floor, and Magnolia's breath stopped, completely stopped, because Jasper's entire torso was a landscape of burn scars, worse than hers, so much worse. Thick, white, ropey tissue covered his chest, his stomach, wrapped around his sides like twisted vines. Old scars, the kind that spoke of agony beyond imagining and years of pain that never quite faded. The kind of scars that changed a person at their very core.
"Confederate prison camp," Jasper whispered, his voice shaking like leaves in a storm. "Andersonville, Georgia, 1864. I was 18 years old, just a boy, really, captured at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain." His hands touched his chest, tracing the worst of the scars almost unconsciously. They packed us in there like animals. 30,000 men in a space meant for 10. No shelter, no medicine. Boys dying every day from disease and starvation. And then one night, the guards set our barracks on fire. Just set them ablaze while we were sleeping inside. Locked the doors from the outside. Magnolia's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing over her. Oh God, Jasper. I watched 37 men burn alive, he continued, tears streaming freely now. I can still hear their screams, still smell the smoke and burning flesh. I only survived because I was small enough to fit through a gap in the floorboards, to squeeze my body through a space no normal-sized man could fit. But not before the flames found me, not before the fire claimed its price. He looked up at her, and the anguish in his eyes was so raw, so devastating, that Magnolia felt her own tears start flowing again. You think you failed your family? Maggie, I left those men screaming. I saved myself and let them die. I could have stayed, could have tried harder to help them, but I ran like a coward, and I've carried that shame every single day for 12 years. Abigail never saw these scars, Jasper said quietly. Not truly. She knew they were there, but I always kept my shirt on, always kept the lights low, always hid what the fire made me because I was too ashamed, too broken, too convinced that if she really saw the monster underneath, she'd leave. He stepped closer to Magnolia, close enough that she could see every line of pain etched into